I've debated for years whether to share this experience. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but another part needs to talk about it. Even typing this makes my hands shake. This happened when I was 13, during what was supposed to be a typical family summer vacation. We were traveling from Texas to Virginia to visit some relatives, and my mom, being the history buff she is, insisted we make a detour to Gettysburg. "It'll be educational," she said. "You're learning about the Civil War in school next year." Looking back, I wish we'd just driven straight through Pennsylvania without stopping. We arrived in Gettysburg around 4 in the afternoon. It was mid-July, sweltering hot, and the town was packed with tourists. But even with all those people around, something felt off. I remember stepping out of our minivan and immediately feeling uneasy, like someone was watching me. The bed and breakfast my mom had booked was this old 2-story house from the 1800s. The owner, an older lady with grey hair pulled into a tight bun, told us proudly that the house had been standing during the battle and had served as a temporary field hospital. She pointed out to my parents where the original bloodstains had been on the floorboards before they were replaced. I remember thinking that was a weird thing to brag about. Our room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a narrow hallway. It was small for the 4 of us, me, my little brother Tyler, who was 9, and my parents, 2 double beds, antique furniture, floral wallpaper that was peeling at the corners. The bathroom was tiny with those old pipes that make noise whenever you turn on the faucet. The thing that stands out in my memory is how stuffy it felt. The window AC unit wheezed and rattled, but barely cooled the room. My dad joked that maybe we should sleep outside where it was cooler. We spent the late afternoon walking around some of the battlefield sites. Mom had bought a guidebook and was reading facts about each location. The whole time we were out there, I couldn't shake this feeling of heaviness. It's hard to describe, like the air itself was pressing down on me. Tyler must have felt it too, because he was unusually quiet and kept staying close to Dad. When we passed by a particular field, I remember stopping dead in my tracks. My mom asked what was wrong, but I couldn't explain it. It felt like walking into a wall of something, sadness, anger, I don't know. I just knew I didn't want to go any further. Dad thought I was just tired from the heat. We had dinner at some family restaurant in town where they had Civil War-themed menu items. The whole place was decorated with old photos and replica weapons. I barely ate anything. Something about this town made my stomach knot up. By the time we got back to the B&B, it was almost 9. My parents wanted to watch some documentary about the battle in the common area downstairs, but I was exhausted. Tyler stayed with them while I went up to get ready for bed. Walking up those stairs alone was the hardest thing. Each step creaked, and the hallway seemed longer and darker than it had earlier. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced someone was behind me. When I got to our room, I rushed inside and turned on every light. I took a quick shower, changed into my pajamas, and climbed into the bed furthest from the door. I left the bathroom light on, and the door cracked. Something I hadn't done since I was little. I tried reading a book I'd brought, but couldn't focus on the words. Eventually, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is my family coming in and getting ready for bed. The room was arranged with one bed against the wall under the window, where Tyler and I slept, and the other bed perpendicular to ours, where my parents slept. Tyler fell asleep almost immediately, and soon I could hear my dad's soft snoring. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. There was no real reason for it. No noise, no movement. 1 second I was asleep. The next, I was wide awake, more alert than I'd ever been in my life. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:04. The first thing I noticed was the cold. It was mid-July in an old building with a crappy AC unit, but the room was freezing. I could see my breath forming little clouds in front of my face. The second thing I noticed was that I wasn't alone. Someone was standing beside my bed. Every instinct told me to scream, to jump up, to run. But something deeper, something primal, kept me completely still. I kept my eyes closed to narrow slits, just enough to see a dark shape looming over me. It wasn't fully solid, more like a dense shadow with the vague outline of a person. Tall, broad-shouldered male, I think, and it was looking directly at me. I could feel it leaning down, its face inches from mine. There was no breath, no sound at all, but I could sense its presence as clearly as if someone had placed a heavy blanket over me. The air around it seemed to vibrate with hatred, pure, undiluted hatred. It hated me. It hated my family. It wanted us gone. I lay there, trying not to shake, trying not to breathe, as this thing examined me for what felt like eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it moved away, toward my brother's side of the bed. I couldn't turn my head to look, but I felt the floorboards vibrate slightly as it moved, like someone heavy was walking across them. It paused by Tyler, then moved to my parents' bed. It stood longest by my dad, and even though I couldn't see clearly, I sensed it leaning over him the same way it had done to me. After what seemed like forever, the thing moved back toward my side of the bed. It stood there, so close, I could have reached out and touched it if I'd dared move. The malevolence coming from it was overwhelming, like standing next to an open furnace, except instead of heat, it radiated pure hatred, and then, suddenly, it was gone. Not like it walked away. It just vanished. The temperature in the room gradually returned to normal, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I lay there, rigid with fear, until sunrise. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. When my family started waking up, I pretended I'd just woken up too. I said nothing about what happened. What could I say? That I'd seen a ghost, that some thing had been watching us sleep. They would have thought I was making it up or had a nightmare. At breakfast, the B&B owner asked how we'd slept. My parents said fine. Tyler complained about me hogging the blankets, which I hadn't. They'd been pulled tight around me all night because I was freezing. I just nodded and stared at my plate of eggs that I couldn't bring myself to eat. We spent another day in Gettysburg, touring more of the battlefield. The whole time I felt like something was following us, watching from behind trees or monuments. I kept close to my dad, jumping at every sound. My mom asked if I was feeling sick. I told her I was just tired. That night, we stayed at a different hotel, a modern chain place on the outskirts of town. I was so relieved. Nothing happened there, but I still barely slept, convinced that whatever I'd seen might find us again. We left Gettysburg the next morning. As we drove away, I kept looking back through the rear window until the town disappeared from view. I remember feeling this weight lifting off me with each mile we put between us and that place. For years, I told no one about what happened. I convinced myself it was just my imagination or a particularly vivid nightmare. I refused to look at the photos my mom had taken in Gettysburg or to talk about the trip. Whenever someone mentioned the Civil War or Gettysburg in school, I'd get this cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. About 18 months ago, my mom mentioned planning another family trip now that I'm in college and Tyler's in high school. She suggested a road trip to see historical sites, including Gettysburg. I blurted out, "I'm not going back there, ever." The look on her face wasn't confusion or surprise, it was recognition. After a long pause, she said quietly, "It's because of that thing that was in the hotel room." I saw it too. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes. Then she told me that she'd woken up that night and seen a dark figure moving around our room. She'd been too terrified to move or speak, thinking it might be an intruder. But when it moved through the solid footboard of their bed to get closer to my dad, she realized it wasn't human. She'd never mentioned it because she didn't want to scare me or Tyler, and because part of her didn't want to admit what she'd seen. We talked for hours that day. She admitted she'd felt the same heaviness I had at certain spots on the battlefield. She'd written it off as the emotional weight of standing where so many had died. I don't know what we encountered in Gettysburg. Was it a soldier who still patrols his post? Someone who died in that house when it was a field hospital, or something darker that was never human to begin with? All I know is that it recognized us as outsiders, as intruders, and it wanted us gone from what it still considered its territory. I will never go back to Gettysburg. Whatever is there, it's still waiting, and I don't think it forgets a face. Story 5. I've never shared this story publicly before. It happened when I was 16, back in 1999, and to this day, I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. I've tried explaining it to myself 1,000 different ways, but nothing makes sense. This is 100% true, even though I know it sounds crazy. I grew up in Pinecrest, one of those cookie-cutter suburban neighborhoods where all the houses looked pretty much the same. My parents had bought our place about a year before this happened. It was a fixer-upper, and my dad was constantly working on something around the house. That summer was brutally hot, and our AC was temperamental at best. My bedroom was on the second floor, facing the backyard. The window in my room was old and didn't open all the way, maybe 6 inches at most, but it was enough to let in some air on those suffocating summer nights. Our backyard was a mess back then. Dad had stacked a bunch of construction materials, mostly wooden boards, some plywood sheets and other stuff, against the chain-link fence that separated our yard from the neighbors. It wasn't exactly pretty, but my parents kept promising they'd finish the renovations soon. The night it happened started like any other. I remember it was a Wednesday because I'd been complaining to my mum about having to mow the lawn the next day. I went to bed around 11, wearing just a pair of basketball shorts because of the heat. I left my window cracked open as usual and fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know what woke me up. There wasn't any noise that I can recall. No dream that startled me awake. Nothing like that. 1 second I was asleep, and the next my eyes just opened. But something was very wrong. The first thing I noticed was the ceiling. It was way too close, like inches from my face close. At first I thought I was dreaming, or still half asleep, so I blinked a few times, trying to clear my vision. But the ceiling was still there, right in front of me. That's when I realized I wasn't lying in my bed anymore. I was floating. Actually fucking floating, suspended about 4 inches from the ceiling. I could see the popcorn texture of the ceiling so clearly, every little bump and ridge. I even noticed a tiny crack I'd never seen before, running along the corner where the ceiling met the wall. I didn't feel anything physically unusual, no weird sensations, no pain. I just felt normal, except I was defying gravity. I wasn't spinning or moving, just hovering there parallel to the ceiling like someone had pressed pause while I was floating upward. The panic hit me all at once. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried to move my arms, my legs, anything, but I couldn't. I wasn't exactly paralyzed. It was more like my body wasn't receiving the signals my brain was desperately sending. And then, without warning, I felt myself being pulled backward. Not falling, being pulled. Like some invisible force had grabbed me and was dragging me down. In less than a second, I was back in my bed, landing with this soft thud that seemed impossibly quiet, considering what had just happened. I lay there, completely rigid, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling that was now where it should be, about 8 feet above me. My body was drenched in cold sweat despite the heat, and I couldn't move a muscle. Not from paralysis this time, but from pure, undiluted fear. That's when I noticed it. In the corner of my room, near the ceiling, there was this thing. It's so hard to describe, even after all these years. It was like a cloud, but dense and swirling, grey, but not like smoke. More like when you mix paint and water and watch it curl and twist. It didn't have a definite shape, but it wasn't formless either. It just existed there, pulsing slightly, about the size of a basketball. The moment I became aware of it, something changed. It was like it suddenly realized I could see it. The swirling got faster, more agitated. I swear to God, it felt like it was looking at me, even though it didn't have eyes or anything resembling a face. What happened next is still crystal clear in my mind. The cloud thing shot across the room, not floated, not drifted, but shot directly over my bed. It moved so fast, it was almost a blur, heading straight for my partially open window. I watched, completely frozen, as it squeezed through that 6-inch gap and disappeared outside. The second it went through the window, there was this sound from the backyard. Not an explosion exactly, but close, like someone had taken all those boards and pieces of wood that were stacked against the fence and thrown them with incredible force. I heard them crashing and scattering, some hitting the side of the house, others landing who knows where. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to my heart pounding in my ears, until the first light of dawn started filtering through my window. Only then did I find the courage to get up. When I looked outside, our backyard was a disaster zone. The wooden boards and plywood sheets that had been neatly stacked against the fence were now scattered everywhere. Some in our yard, some in the neighbors. It looked like a small tornado had hit just that specific spot. A few pieces had even landed on the back porch, a good 20 feet from where they'd been stacked. I never told my parents what really happened. When they saw the mess, I mumbled something about a storm during the night. They seemed confused. There hadn't been any storms forecast, but they didn't question it too much. Dad was just annoyed he had to clean everything up before he could continue working on the house. Here's the part that still freaks me out the most. I somehow knew, with absolute certainty, that the entity, or whatever it was, needed the window to be open to escape. It's not like it told me this, or I read it somewhere. I just knew it, like it was information that had been downloaded directly into my brain. I knew that if my window had been closed that night, things would have gone very differently, and not in a good way. For weeks afterward, I slept with my window firmly shut, despite the heat. I'd wake up multiple times each night, scanning the corners of my ceiling, terrified I'd see that grey, swirling cloud again. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to my bed, though what good it would have done against something like that, I have no idea. The crazy thing is, nothing like this has ever happened to me before or since. No paranormal experiences, no other unexplainable events. Just this one night that has haunted me for 24 years. I've tried to rationalize it in every possible way. Maybe it was sleep paralysis, but that doesn't explain the scattered wood outside. An extremely vivid dream, same problem. Some kind of hallucinatory episode combined with a freak windstorm. Seems like too much of a coincidence. A few years ago, I read about out-of-body experiences and how some people report floating above themselves during these events. That's the closest explanation I've found, but it still doesn't account for the grey entity or the explosion of wood outside my window. What bothers me most is that I'll probably never know what really happened that night. Was it something supernatural? Some kind of entity or spirit? Was I somehow briefly caught between dimensions or realities, or is there some perfectly logical explanation that I just haven't thought of? One detail I've never been able to shake is how calm I felt while floating. The panic only set in after I was pulled back down. While I was up there near the ceiling, there was this weird sense of, I don't know, acceptance, like some part of me understood what was happening, even if my conscious mind didn't. I've moved 6 times since then. I'm married now, with kids of my own. We live in a different state, in a house that's nothing like the one I grew up in. But I still check the corners of my ceiling before I go to sleep. I still feel a chill when I think about that swirling grey cloud, and how it seemed to notice me noticing it. And I always sleep with the windows closed, no matter how hot it gets. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there somewhere, that entity. If it moved on to something or someone else after it left my room, or if it's somehow tied to me specifically, waiting for the right moment, the right open window. to return? I don't have answers. All I know is that what happened that night was the most real, unreal thing that's ever happened to me, and even after 24 years, I can't explain it. I probably never will. Story 6. I've never told anyone the full story of what happened after my cousin Vikram died last year. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, and honestly, I've been afraid that talking about it might make things worse, but I can't keep it bottled up anymore, so here goes. Vikram and I grew up together in our small town in Tamil Nadu. We were more like brothers than cousins. When I got the call that he was in his final hours after a 2-year battle with cancer, I dropped everything and rushed to be by his side. I reached the hospital around 4 in the afternoon. The smell hit me as soon as I walked into his room. That antiseptic hospital odor mixed with something else, something I now recognize as the approach of death. Vikram looked nothing like the strong, vibrant man I remembered. His face was sunken, skin stretched tight over his cheekbones, eyes closed as he labored to breathe. His mother, my aunt, was sitting beside him, exhausted from weeks of barely sleeping. When she saw me, she just nodded and stepped out to get some tea, leaving me alone with him. I took her place in the plastic chair and gently took his hand. His fingers were cold and so thin I could feel every bone. "I'm here, Bai," I whispered, using our childhood nickname for each other. "I'm right here with you." For about an hour, I just sat there, sometimes talking softly about memories we shared, sometimes just holding his hand in silence. Around 5:30, he started getting more agitated, his breathing becoming more labored. I pressed the call button, and a nurse came in to check his vitals. "It won't be long now," she said quietly, before leaving us alone again. What happened next is something they don't really prepare you for. As Vikram's body began shutting down, he lost control of his bowels. The smell was immediate and overwhelming in the small room. But I didn't call the nurse right away. Something told me not to leave him, not even for a second. Instead, I held his hand tighter and leaned in close. "It's okay, Bai. You can let go now. We'll be okay." At 5:47, he took one final rattling breath, and then nothing. The silence was deafening. I sat there for a few minutes, still holding his hand, before finally getting up to tell the nurse and my aunt. The next 24 hours were a blur of phone calls, arrangements, and rituals. In our community, cremation happens quickly, usually within a day. By the next afternoon, we were preparing Vikram's body for the final journey to the cremation grounds about 2 kilometers from his home. I was one of the 6 men chosen to carry his body. As we were lifting him onto the bamboo stretcher, I noticed some of the mess from his final moments had dried on the sheet. In the process of moving him, my forearm brushed against it. I noticed it, but didn't have time to clean it properly. We needed to get to the cremation grounds before sunset. As we carried him through the narrow streets of our town, people stepped aside respectfully. Some joined the procession. Others watched silently from doorways. I was at the front right corner of the stretcher, and as we walked, I began noticing a smell. Not just the normal smell of a body, but something sharper, more pungent. At first, I thought it was coming from Vikram, but it seemed to intensify specifically when I got closer to the cremation pyre. By the time we reached the grounds, the smell was so overwhelming I was breathing through my mouth. We placed his body on the pyre, and the priest began the rituals. Throughout the ceremony, I kept getting whiffs of that smell, much stronger than it should have been. I glanced down at my arm and noticed the stain from earlier. Somehow, in the humid heat, it seemed to have grown more noticeable. After his eldest son lit the pyre, we all stepped back to watch. The smoke billowed up, carrying Vikram's spirit away, according to our beliefs. I stood there until my eyes stung, partly from tears, partly from the smoke. When it was time to leave, I noticed a small stream running near the cremation grounds and went to wash my arm. I scrubbed at the spot vigorously, wanting to remove every trace of it. The water was cool against my skin, but even after washing, I could still detect that smell faintly on myself. I splashed water on my face, trying to clear my head before the journey home. It was around 7:30 in the evening when I finally started my ride back. I lived about 20 kilometers away, and though I was emotionally drained, I wanted to get home rather than stay with relatives. Normally, the roads would be busy with people returning from work, shops still open, street food vendors setting up for the evening rush. But that night, everything seemed unnaturally quiet. The first part of my journey was uneventful. I passed through 2 villages where at least there were some signs of life. A few people sitting outside their homes, the occasional vehicle passing by. But as I got onto the coastal road that ran alongside the beach for about 5 kilometers, an eerie emptiness settled in. The streetlights were functioning, but there was no traffic, no pedestrians, not even stray dogs that usually roamed the area. About 13 kilometers into my journey, I was riding along this beach stretch when I noticed something by the roadside. At first glance, it looked like a person lying down, perhaps 50 meters ahead. My first thought was that it might be a drunk or someone who'd passed out from drugs. It wasn't uncommon to find fishermen drinking after a long day at sea. I slowed down slightly but decided not to stop. It wasn't safe to pull over on such a deserted stretch, especially after dark. As I approached and then passed the figure, something strange happened. That same unbearable stench from the funeral suddenly returned, hitting me with such force that I nearly lost control of my bike. It wasn't just strong. It felt invasive, like it was being forced up my nostrils, down my throat, filling my lungs. I accelerated, thinking I could outrun it, but the smell only intensified. Then I saw it. In the middle of the road, about 20 meters ahead, stood a black figure. Even in the glow of my headlight, it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It was short, barely reaching my waist if I had been standing next to it. Something about its proportions was wrong. It wasn't a child or a dwarf. It wasn't anything I could recognize as human. Everything inside me screamed danger. Some primal instinct told me not to stop, not to slow down, not even for a second. I gripped the throttle tighter and aimed straight ahead, planning to swerve at the last moment if necessary. As I got closer, the figure remained motionless. The stench became so powerful I could taste it at the back of my throat, that same death smell from Vikram's final moments, but 100 times stronger. Just as I was about to reach it, doing about 90 kilometers per hour, I swerved slightly to the right. I didn't look directly at it as I passed. I couldn't bring myself to. But from the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something that wasn't right. No face, just darkness where features should be. The moment I passed it, I heard something behind me. Not footsteps exactly, more like a rapid shuffling, scraping sound. Whatever it was following me, and somehow, impossibly, keeping pace with my motorcycle. My blood turned to ice. I was pushing my bike to its limits, the engine screaming in protest, but the shuffling sound remained constant, right behind me. I refused to look back. Every instinct told me that seeing it clearly would be even worse than imagining it. For the next 7 kilometers, I rode in a state of pure terror. My knuckles were white on the handlebars, my body rigid with fear. The shuffling sound never faltered, never fell behind. The stench remained, surrounding me like a toxic cloud. When I finally reached the turnoff to my street, the sound abruptly stopped. I didn't slow down until I reached my house, practically falling off my bike in the driveway. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them twice before managing to unlock my door and slammed it shut behind me. Safe inside, I collapsed against the door, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. For several minutes I just sat there, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it all. Stress, grief, exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. When I finally calmed down enough to move, I went straight to the bathroom to wash my face. As I raised my arm to turn on the tap, I froze. There, on my forearm, exactly where I had washed away the stain from Vikram's body, was the same dark smear. It wasn't possible. I had scrubbed it clean at the stream. I had seen it wash away, but there it was, and with it that unmistakable smell of death. I scrubbed my arm raw that night, used nearly half a bottle of soap, but the smell lingered. It faded over the next few days, but never completely disappeared. It's been 11 months now, and things have only gotten stranger. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night to find shadows moving across my ceiling, where no shadows should be. The smell returns randomly, while I'm at work, sitting in a restaurant riding my bike, hitting me with such force that I gag. I've had nightmares so vivid I wake up drenched in sweat. The sheets twisted around me like I've been fighting something in my sleep. Last week, I caught a glimpse of something small and dark, moving just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look, nothing was there. But that smell, that unmistakable smell, filled the room. I don't know what followed me home that night. I don't know if it was something attached to Vikram, or something that found me because of him. All I know is that ever since that ride home from his funeral, I haven't been alone, and whatever it is, it's getting bolder.